share a little bit about Dirty Salad Club. So Dirty Salad Club is a place for HR professionals, coaches, psychologists, L&D professionals to come together, to talk with each other, to learn from each other, to gain some insights into topics that we're already familiar with, things that are emerging as new in research, and really as a forum for us just all to share and be together as a network of professionals. The name Dirty Salad Club, some people wonder where on earth did that come from? It's really trying to get across what we're all about. So dirty in that it's a little bit vulnerable. This is the place for us to share things where we're among peers, maybe that we wouldn't necessarily talk about with clients, but we feel comfortable to share with each other. Salad in that it's good for us, it's healthy, we're learning, we're growing. And club in that we're all in this together. So there tends to be an awful lot of commonalities among everybody from what we're seeing from our clients, what we're hearing from the organizations that we're working with. We meet together once a month. It's usually on the third Wednesday of every month at 11 a.m. GMT or Irish time. And we welcome lots of different people to host. So we've had all of our own team members at Kinch Lyons hosting, Alan, Billy, Niamh, Susan, myself, and Julie formerly, but we welcome any members of the club who'd like to host. Okay, so even any of you here who hosted in 2021, any burning topics, anything that's new, anything you're really excited about, we'd love to hear from you and have you host again in 2022. So that's something to keep in mind and something we'll come back to at the end of today's session as well. We've had lots of great speakers in 2021 and we've been really, really lucky. So in addition to our own team, we've had some people who were here today, Neil, Justine. We've had all of these people here talking on topics from communication to listening skills to technology. William Cornish did a great session on technology and how we can use it. I really remember that. It was a really funny session. He did it quite early on during the pandemic when a lot of us were still getting to grips with technology. And there was a lot of, William, what was that now? What was that thing called? Will you say that again? A really, really helpful session. We Becca Brighty talking about the neuropsychology of change. Evelyn Johnson talking about listening skills, and we'll be talking about that today. Neil, conscious communication in the workplace. You'll be talking a little bit about your session as well today. We had Aoife Donovan Lee on techno stress, Paddy Moran on how to increase trust, Louisa Bullow from PCL on how to keep change people-centric within organizations, and Jennifer Dowling on time, which we'll also be talking a little bit about today. So a really, really great range of topics that I think all of us in the club have found personally really helpful for our own practice, but then we've also been able to bring that to our work with our clients as well. So we're looking forward to more of the same and onwards and upwards and bigger and better in 2022. But for today, we're just going to focus on what have been some of our highlights over 2021, the things that the team here at Kinch Lyons have really found helpful and what we've brought into our own practice. So we're going to kick off. Alan's going to start. So Alan, when you're ready, if you want to share your own highlights.
And just to echo that, Tanya, I was even thinking back to when the Dirty Salad Club started. So dirty meaning we get together, be vulnerable. Salad means we learn something that's good for us in the club. And it was actually at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was a way for us to all stay connected. And then it kind of grew, which is wonderful. And it's a way really to get together and share insights, be vulnerable, which traditionally has never been done in our space. I mean, even coming back from, from counseling psychology, if somebody liked one type of therapy, you kind of, not only did you have to say yours was great, you belittled the other person's. It kind of started with Freud and Jung, and then it kind of, but the great thing about this is it's really, that's kind of gone. We're a lot more eclectic. A lot of you are coaches now, and you pick up bits that work here and there, like magpies, but this is a great format for doing that. I know we kind of build it, which talk was our favorite today, but in many ways, when I was thinking, when you asked that, Tanya, I was thinking, well, I haven't necessarily wouldn't pick one over the other, but there's bits from every single one which I've used. There's bits I've used in my own coaching where I pick up a technique that somebody shared that they've used, or indeed even in a presentation, some research or an idea. And that's the real powerful bit. And I love that bit about sharing it rather than, I have this knowledge, get it out there. And I think the pandemic, for one thing, has got us all a bit more comfortable with that. But that said, I have selected one, which I found to be the most useful. And it was done back in April. And I will just bring up my screen here. If I can. Conscious communication in the virtual world. And it was Niamh. Now, so I came across Niamh first up in the IMI. He did an improv session. And I've always been curious about improv in terms of facilitating change and open awareness. I was actually doing a piece on Teams, and Niamh was doing a piece on improv afterwards. So I asked to stay on to watch it in action. I've obviously seen it in comedy clubs, but I'd never seen it in relation to leadership and teams. And it was phenomenal, the impact it had. And then when Niamh did this bit about conscious communication in the virtual world, in virtual working, which is interesting because, it is about managing your mood and how you show up, because we're not deliberate about these things. We suddenly went virtual, and now it's going to be a new way of working, but we never became conscious about how we show up. And it's huge. And you can even see Daniel Kahneman's book during the year, Noise, Not Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, talks about that, how your mood can greatly impact your error of judgment. Not a bias, but how you go about making decisions. And it's the exact same. Everybody's feeling a bit paranoid online, not feeling connected. The whole, there's no psychological safety created. We now know that productivity has remained the same. Do you remember at first the bosses said, if people are working virtually or from home, productivity will go down? Well, that's been proven wrong. In fact, in some cases, it's gone up, but at what cost? Well, it's probably because people had nothing else to do. But one thing that has gone down is relationships. That's why we have the Dirtiest Salad Club. Psychological safety, being comfortable with people, and this is what Niamh, this is why his topic really grabbed me. But the virtual workplaces, it's not a case of let's wait till we get back to the office. And a lot of people are looking at it like that. This is change. This is change for good. So we should be looking at new ways of working, the hybrid piece, but not just copy and paste. Let's look at new ways to go about working together. So that's where I think Niamh really grabbed me there. And he talked about how you have to be conscious in your communication. And I was thinking about this. I said, you know what? Most people aren't. They're unconscious communication. And it's not a bad thing. It's our default. And another person I learned a lot from this year was Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, who, when he was in the Royal College of Surgeons this year, talked about how, you remember the whole idea of learned helplessness, his famous study in the 70s, why some kids fall behind. We look at the teachers and we see with the teachers that, they gave unconscious messages to the kid that we don't believe you can. And then the kids fall behind and all of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. And we also blame the parents a bit in there. Now, that was all Martin Seligman's work. And it was really interesting listening to him. He said in his kind of yonder years now, I think the question was asked to him, is there any research you'd look at again? And he goes, yeah, the learned helplessness, I realized, was never learned. It was a default. We all default to being helpless. So you have to be intentional and deliberate about the opposite. And that's what we do in coaching. But it's the same with the communication. We unconsciously don't even think of how we communicate. So we have to become conscious of it. And I think improv and what Niamh does and coaching does, that's what it does. And I was also thinking about looking at it, it's all intrinsically linked to emotional intelligence. In a way, managing our emotions is going to be key to managing the virtual world. So even being aware of how you show up before you go online, etc. Because people mirror each other, and we pick up the energy. Your energy reveals you before you do. So even being mindful of that, even more conscious of that in the new way of working is going to be really important. And the other thing, what I learned from this was around, I put up the book there as well, Adam Grant. He's a business psychologist in Morton, because that was out this year as well. And it kind of was linked. The thinking, again, is very linked to what Niamh was talking about, the conscious communication. And the kind of the hypothesis in that book is the inability to flex and think differently, i.e. about virtual world, leads you to be a more hostile version of yourself. So if you think of what we do in OT and coaching, we're trying to help people to expand and stretch their world of thinking. But the inability to do that, flex, and that's the premise of the book, which was quite interesting concept to look at. So what I learned, is, go back a page, is that conscious communication, to do it, you have to declare your intent, you have to be intentional about it. And if you're linking it to emotional intelligence, which a lot of it is, it's all been about deliberate in your emotional expression. And especially online, how do you do that online? How do you actually talk about emotions rather than just having transactional relationships? And people are talking about that. They're saying we're online, all we're doing is having transactional relationships. And then they came out with this whole thing about Zoom fatigue, which we thought was just a pop psychology fad, but actually it exists. And the reason being, by the way, Stanford did a peer-reviewed paper of it, is mainly because of this constant gaze. And I would have covered this, Niamh, with a couple of people in the call last week, but you have this constant gaze. You're always looking at somebody in the eyes, and especially if it's one-on-one. But that's not how we communicate. In fact, when we look at microanalysis of therapeutic dialogue, it shows that when you ask, if you're a coach and you ask a coach a question, they generally, if you ask them in the same room, you look away for about up to 6 seconds as you think about it. And then you come back and you look at the coach, and the coach will generally look away and come back to you. And that's called grounding the sequence of communication. That's how we all communicate. But invariably, when you're on this thing, constant gaze, your amygdala is going off, you're just staring. That's why we're wrecked, because it's not a way. And then the other thing we do is most people aren't listening, they're multitasking, etc. So that constant, that Zoom fatigue is there. So we have to be more conscious, declare our intent. Now, the other thing that Neil covered was, he said, in the middle of joy and fear, there is improv, which I love, because we're all a bit of both. It's a bit like when you talk about fixed mindset, growth mindset. People like to think that growth mindset, I'm fearful, but I'm joyous. But if I can be deliberate, how do I actually stretch and push over to that joyful side more? And, it's the improv bit that will enable us to do that. There was a lovely moment as well. I took this down when Neil said, take a deep breath before he introduced one of his activities. And he says, and this will lower you into a fake sense that it will make any difference to what we're about to do. Which I thought was, now he was basically slagging off mindfulness and meditation, that it will actually help. Now he's wrong, it does help, going back to breath does help, but I thought it was very funny the way he introduced that. And then the words were originally magic, and it's been so intentional about your words. Sigmund Freud said words were originally magic, well, they still are. How you consciously communicate can actually transform your experience and the experience of other people, which is really important. And there was a thing in COVID now in the States they're looking at, when people are recovering from it, a lot of people are reporting that they have mental health issues, depression, anxiety. So the whole thinking was, oh my God, not only does COVID make you sick, but now when you recover from it, you have a mental health issue. Well, it's unlikely to be obviously COVID, but it's how we've been thinking and speaking about it to each other. So you just, as a leader, think about that. You can transform people's experience. Anybody can talk about why things are broken, but actually in the virtual world, if it went well, what we need to get out of it. Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, said, we've done in 6 months digital transformation, which we couldn't have done in 6 years. Well, we can do the same thing with conscious communication and working from home and virtual. We can actually change the way people want into the way people want it to work a lot quicker. People who don't normally like being disrupted are up for change because of this. And that's why I think we see the great resignation, etc. People just feel disconnected. So quick 3 takeaways. There's way more than this. And I'm building Neil's work into Martin Seligman's, into Adam Grant, but I love it, even Nadella from the CEO of Microsoft. It's rethinking how to communicate. We can't just kind of copy and paste it online. We have to do things differently. And then in the middle of joy and fear, how that is, it's so important, there is improv, because this is so important. You can take things so seriously, you miss things. So how do you make people joyous? A way to create that, a direct route to creating psychological safety is to improv, is to use it and be conscious of it. And then the conscious communication can transform your experience, literally being deliberate about it, being intentional. As Martin Seligman pointed out, our default is to go for the negative, but we can be intentional about flourishing, but we have to be. And I think that's where we can make a huge difference as OD and coaches, etc. So I'll end with a quote by Wittgenstein, because then you might think I'm into philosophy, but it's just linked to therapy dialogue. But he says, you only hear the question you asked when you hear the answer you get, which I think is very interesting when we talk about conscious communication. You only actually know that what you've been asking somebody when you hear the answer you get, rather than they weren't listening. It was the way it was asked. So be very conscious about how we're communicating. Okay, so I will hand it back. I know we're going to kind of feel free to improvise and come in with any comments, but Billy's going to lead on now. But if anybody wants to come in now, feel free. If not, I will ask Billy to go next, just based on time.
I think just before you come in, Billy, I'm laughing here because Niamh, I'd say so many people are curious and interested about improv after that. I think that was great, Alan, to hear the connections between improv and the power it has. And I'm laughing, Niamh, because I'm thinking maybe you're very lucky the kids are there in the background. Otherwise, I'd be putting you on the spot and saying, could you give us all an example or a demonstration?
Well, just make sure you take a deep breath before you do, Niamh.
I've since found out if you hold your breath, you're actually better off than taking a deep breath. Keep all that tension and anxiety in. Thanks very much, Alan. Gosh, that was a nice surprise on a stormy creche closed morning. So thank you. Yeah, and it's just I know I've been running in-person classes again, and what's been very interesting. I've just finished 2 groups there this week. What's interesting is their comments on the return to in-person communication with colleagues and outside of their immediate social circle, and that desperate craving for reconnection. And also a lot of, anecdotal comments about people finding it difficult to make eye contact with strangers and with kind of their outer circles of connection again. So I guess we've still got a lot of relearning and redesigning to do, redesigning of how we communicate to do going forward.
Yeah, and there's a piece, Niamh, in the British Psychological Society last week on having deep conversations with people you don't know can actually give you a very strong sense of well-being. So when you stop, I think Irish people are great at this, at the bus stop or in the pub, having a deep conversation with somebody you don't know, it can actually give you a strong sense of purpose and meaning and well-being. And interesting, what the article went on to show us, but most people shy away from having those conversations with people they don't know because they feel it's awkward. But I think culturally, I don't know if we do, but a great way, going back to it, if you are, and I often refer people, if you find it difficult to connect or a bit shy, to look at the improv, because what I think Niamh does is makes that vulnerable, scary space a lot easier. And once you jump into a bit of improv, you won't be able to stop yourself. And I think older people, like my mum, who's very embarrassing to be around, they do it naturally. But I think it's very good for them, they step in and they ask people questions they shouldn't be anywhere near, But I think improv is a huge skill there.
Alan, speaking of not being able to stop yourself, I think we better crack on. Time is against us, and that leads us nicely into Billy's highlight and session there.
Thank you. Thanks a million. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me a moment. Interestingly, I'm going to talk about Jen Dowling's session, which was Let's Talk Time, and this is back to January of this year. And it's interesting. I'm going to do a really quick whistle-stop tour. I'm going to be very conscious of time myself. Why the topic grabbed me? It is something that keeps coming up. I mean, I do quite a few coaching hours every month, so I get an opportunity to deal with lots and lots of different things. But time management is something that crops up again and again and again. But secondly, I think the COVID and the working from home, it seems to have, on the one hand, to some people, made it much more challenging. Some people have really struggled because of lack of structure. But actually, there are some people who have thrived from a time management point of view and have said, gosh, this is so much better than what was going on in the workplace. So that really made me really curious as well. What was that difference? But just even at a broader sense, time is fascinating. Everybody has a view about it. Psychologists, sociologists, philosophers, physicists. If you read Carlo Rovelli has books on it. So everybody has a view of time. And we all personally experience it as well every day. So here's the things that I learned. And this is not meant to be a summary, by the way, of the fantastic session that this is based on from Jen. And I would encourage you to go onto the Dirty Salad Club LinkedIn group. All of the sessions are there that you can go back and visit. But this is what I learned. This is what I took away. So it reflects as much of my interest as what was in the actual topic. So the two things: there are organizational differences and there are individual differences. At an organizational level, every organization has time structures. So like start times, finish times, budget cycles, like end of month reporting, all of that stuff. There's lots of stuff you can actually go in and see. It's written down somewhere, somewhere or other, you can kind of see there are actual structures around time. But there's also time norms. So what are the norms in the organization? Just take a simple one, meetings. Do we start meetings on time? Do we finish them on time? That is a norm. It's not written down anywhere, but it's part of the culture. And this is, okay, there's national cultures kind of an impact there as well. But just take an organization. There are these norms, even within the team. So what's the team? Is it a norm for the team to, we say email each other in the evenings or not? Take calls outside of work hours. What are the norms around there that we all live by? So there are organizational differences, both structurally and from a norms point of view, but there's also individual differences. And this is a term that came up in Jen's presentation that I hadn't come across before, which is temporal awareness. Now, it's not about just being aware that time is passing. It's people who are temporally aware look on time as a resource that is finite. So in other words, they say, this is an hour that I need to put into something. They see it as a resource. If I'm not putting it into this, I can put it into something else, rather than a kind of an infinite just stream of time that's passing by. So temporal awareness, people who are high in temporal awareness, it's an individual preference, are more conscious of time as a finite resource. That helps them to plan differently. The other piece which I really was fascinated by was segmenters versus integrators. There are people who like to segment things, they like to have a nice start, nice finish, keep things very separate when they're dealing with lots of different tasks. And then there are integrators, like called polychronic versus monochronic. So they are the people who like to start a little bit of this, maybe jump into something else, not really multitasking, but keeping several things going at the same time, and tend to blend things together. And this is a big impact, by the way, on, we say, work-life balance. So a segmenter likes work-life balance. I'm finished my work. I'm now in the out of work. That's it. Like, there's a clear, definitive finish time. An integrator is more likely to have a little bit of work stuff mixed in with a bit of like normal day-to-day, like life admin, and much more integrated. And the third one is fascinating for me as well, is temporal self-efficacy, which is, do I believe I have control over my time, or what level? No one has 100% control, but even that sense of my own self-efficacy, do I feel I have some control over my time or not? That's also an individual difference. And when you look at all of these together, I mean, this is what's the big learning? We take those things there. I have to move my screen 1 second, excuse me. The takeaways. The organization can have structures and norms which can actually either help you or hinder you as an individual in having effective time management. So it's not just, I could, give someone the best time management training in the world for a nice fee, but they might be completely unsuccessful because the norms and structures in the organization are actually working against them. So in another case, obviously, you could have poor enough personal time management, but the structures and norms in the organization help you to be better. Second, so because of that, time management is not a one-size-fits-all because of those individual and organizational differences. Like there isn't a single time management methodology, even though we might have our own favorites, and that goes back to our individual preferences, by the way. There isn't a single time management solution that will suit everybody in every organization. It's much more individual than that, and we can't have a one-size-fits-all. And lastly, time management is a decision-making process. It can be conscious, it can be unconscious. Obviously, real-time management, we're trying to be more conscious in the way we approach it, rather than just relying on an unconscious way of dealing with it. But it is decision-making, and that's an interesting insight, and just to take that away and say, actually, when I'm managing time, I am decision-making. And there's an overlap there between the way we make decisions and the way we manage our time. Now, unfortunately, I don't have Wittgenstein to quote as Alan did. I tend to my go-to is always playwrights, Samuel Beckett. The person who probably wrote best about things like time and memory, Waiting for Godot, with Vladimir and Estragon pondering over whether Godot will ever come or not to them. And that play is all about time and all about memory. So those are my takeaways. It's not a summary, but those are things that really made me curious. I think it's a great session to go back and view again. I'll stop my share and hope that all of you can manage your time more effectively in 2022. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Billy.
It was one of those ones where you see time management, you go, we know this, but it was definitely new insights on it, which is great.
Yeah. I think we should change from time management to time decision making.
Yeah. Wait, Frank and Covey, they do the big time management, but I remember they came out last year and said, well, time management training doesn't work. You've only been doing it for 20 years, but it's decision making.
It's all about how you make decisions. Yeah. So there you go. So thank you.
Thanks, Billy. I think that piece about it being decision making is great, because it really just reiterates that it's something that you can be proactive about and deliberate about, and make conscious choices about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, super session from Jen. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to share mine next. Okay, and mine, my highlight, back to Alan's point, they were all so brilliant, but for me, this one really, really stood out on a personal level, on a professional level, was Justine McGrath's session on creating a compelling vision for your future, which was back in March, I think, of 2021. And a couple of reasons it stood out. Just on a personal level, I really noticed how I reacted to this session, because to be honest, it was just really exciting. Because when we think about March 2021, we were a year into the pandemic. And even just that, the awareness of the fact that it was a year was important and significant, I think, at this time. And to be talking about something in the future and to take part in the exercises that Justine did as part of the session, where you were projecting yourself in the future, felt really exciting. And I noticed my heart started beating a little bit faster. I actually felt a bit giddy, because for the first time in so long, you were out, mentally out of the pandemic, out of the current state. And that was really, really fantastic. But also professionally as well, I noticed there were so many clients I was working with at the time. I can hear a slight echo here. Can anybody else hear that? Okay, I'm just going to check everyone's on mute. Bear with me one sec. Okay, I think we're okay. I was finding a lot of clients I was working with, I noticed they were quite preoccupied with the present, and we're finding it difficult to move out of that and to focus on the future. And it's something that can happen to us psychologically. With something like this, our sense of time can become distorted. And we do tend to be overly focused on what's happening for us at the moment. And if we do tend to project into the future, they tend to be quite negative thoughts that we can have about the future. So I felt this was a really useful session. And I was hoping there were things that I could take away from it that I'd be able to use with my clients. And absolutely, there were, Justine. I think it's some really, really great practical things in there, which we'll share now as well. So a couple of things I learned from it. One is that our identity narrative can be divided into past, present, and future. And we talk a lot, anybody coaches or in L&D among us will know, we talk an awful lot about self-talk and how that can impact us, the effects it has on us. But Justine's session, and this is the work of the psychologist Benjamin Hardy, she was talking about dividing that narrative into the past, present, and future. Which is something I've used with clients since. I think it's really, really helpful to reflect on and discuss how your identity narrative was previously, where it is now, and where you'd like it to be in the future. And also reflecting on from where it was in the past to where it is in the present. How did you get here? How has it changed? What did you do to help with change? And I've used that with different timescales, depending on what's happening for your clients. It could be helpful to look at that past, might be 10 years ago, it might be 10 months ago, 10 weeks ago, depending on their context and what's going on for them. I also learned that the concept of flow is key to developing your future self. So we talk a lot about flow. It's a huge part. It's one of the cornerstones of positive psychology, and we do a lot of work in our individual sessions and our workshops around it. And it's that, for anyone that doesn't know, it's that when you say you're in the zone, when you're doing something that you're completely engaged in, really, really focused on, and maybe you lose all sense of time, you lose an awareness of what's happening around you, that's when you're in flow. And that's when you're doing things that you really, really love, that you can be really, really good at. So it was great to hear the connection between that and our future selves. I was also, on a joking note, really, really grateful for Justine for mentioning the work of Willie Horton around flow, because often we talk about a psychologist called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi when it comes to flow, who has the most difficult name to spell you've ever imagined. And when we were working in person, it's fine because you have the name written there. But in a lot of sessions I've been doing during the pandemic, where maybe I haven't used slides and somebody says to me, how do you spell that name? I'm saying Willie Horton. Willie Horton now we can reference, as well as Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And also lastly, learning is that an accountability partner is crucial. Okay, so when it comes to personal, professional development, creating that vision, implementing that vision of your future self, having somebody that you trust, that you respect, who can hold you accountable, is really, really going to help your success there. And that might be a peer, it might be your leader, it might be a mentor, it might be a coach. So lots of different options, but really, really helpful for success is having that accountability partner. There are a couple of really, really practical things in Justine's session that I took away from it that hopefully will help everybody here as well. One is the use of the word now. And anyone who's worked with Kinch Lyons, or maybe been part of any of our workshops, or I know some of you may have seen some of us in the IMI, you'll know how much we talk about small steps and small words and how powerful, impactful they can be. And how Justine used the words now reminded me a lot of the work of Carol Dweck and her work on growth mindset, where she's done an awful lot of work. She's worked with the UN as a consultant, where there's literally different nations who can't agree on how best to proceed with a policy. She's worked with schools in terms of trying to help improve students' grades. And she talks a lot about the word yet, in that we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't achieved that yet. We haven't agreed on that yet. And in a very similar vein, Justine used the word now. So in terms of that identity narrative and how we tend to talk about ourselves, and you'll often hear people say, that's just the way I am. You know, I'm no good at maths. I'm no good at presenting. That's just the way I am. And Justine talked about, that's just the way I am now. I thought that was a really helpful phrase and a really helpful thing to explore with people. And I found that those small little words can be really, really helpful in terms of small steps and something practical and tangible that we can support our clients with. They can be really, really helpful. There was a great exercise as part of this session as well. In the breakout rooms, Justine had everybody come up with a few tips or a few lists of what people think are habits of successful people. And these were things they included: meditating, exercising, being decisive, asking for help when needed, seeking feedback, being organized, having a good morning ritual, focusing on the end goal, having self-belief, having clear goals, things like this. But it was really, really helpful to have all of those together. And since I've used that with clients and said, look, which one of these appeals to you? And it's been a great way to focus in on something, again, practical, that they might be able to do in terms of that future self and working towards that. And lastly, look, we all know this, but I don't think you can ever reiterate it too much, is to measure the gains, not the gap, focus on progress, not perfection. We're highlighted there. So, you know, as we're making progress towards our future selves, if we don't fully get there immediately, that's okay. If we get halfway there, that rather than thinking about the half that we didn't achieve or where we haven't gotten yet, it's much more helpful to focus on where we have gone. And we do a lot of this solution-focused work in our coaching as well. So focusing on what we have gained or how we have progressed, and what have we done, or what behaviors have we or our clients changed that have helped us to get there. And so there are three things that I've used since in my work, and I hope might be helpful for some of you here today. So Justine, thanks so much for a really, really great session. It was wonderful. It really, really was.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That really, I'm so glad that some of that resonated. I'm just absolutely delighted. So thanks a million. Really appreciate that. Just made my day.
No, thank you. And the last one, quote from me as well, which is one I know you have, Justine. Anybody who isn't embarrassed by who they were last year probably isn't learning enough. Another philosopher here. So we're really flying the flag for philosophy this morning in Kinch Lyons. But I really like this one because, you know, when we often talk about maybe being embarrassed by our former selves, we think back to a long time ago. We think back to when we were teenagers, you know, wearing terrible outfits to the disco and wearing blue eyeshadow, you know, saying silly things, whatever it might be. But actually just to narrow that gap in terms of the time and even thinking about who we were last year compared to who we were this year, I think is really helpful. So Justine, thanks a million.
Thanks, Tanya.
Okay, Susan, last of the Kinch Lyons team we have here this morning to share. Susan, whenever you're ready.
There we go, sorry. Yes. Yeah, let me just share my screen here. Okay, can everyone see that? All right, so the Dirty Salad Club that I wanted to speak about was Refresh Your Listening Skills by Evelyn Johnson a couple of months ago. And what I really liked about this one was, you know, obviously we talk about listening skills and active listening and everything a lot in coaching, but it was the experiential nature of this session. It was the way that we really got to experience, again, what it was like to be properly listened to. So one of the things that initially grabbed me about this topic was the kind of reflection on how many of us are completely unaware of the type of listening that we engage in and how well we actually listen. So, you know, communication is one of those issues that arises most often probably in relationship therapy. And I think a lot of us don't distinguish between the types of the different types of listening that we're actually capable of. Thinking about what Alan talked about in Neil's session around the sort of default position that often the communication isn't conscious, it's just sort of what happens. And it reminded me of the importance of making that distinction again. And I thought about even just, you know, in this era of technology, when so much of the time we're on Zoom calls, I don't know if you've had the experience where maybe you've been speaking to somebody or you've been speaking about something and you're quite aware that somebody's maybe checking emails in the background, or there's something else going on, or there's even the scanning of text messages and things that might be coming in. And the feeling that can create in the person that's speaking, because it's so primal, I think, this idea of wanting to be heard and be listened to. And as babies, it's so important for us that our caregivers hear us. And I think that that's really something that stays with us throughout our whole lives. So one of the things that we did in that session was we had a brainstorm around some of the negative feelings that can be connected to not being listened to. You know, things like disrespect, loneliness, dismissal, feelings of being unloved, feelings of being hurt, frustrated, shut down, ignored, vulnerable, all these kinds of things. So I think much more than we would let on and are probably even aware of, the idea of not being heard can have quite a dramatic effect on us. And then we also talked about what positive associations we had with being listened. So being cared for, feeling loved, feeling safe, feeling seen, feeling validated. So all of this really, really wonderful stuff. And one of the key learnings for me was that reflection on the different types of listening that we do engage in. So the distractive listening, and you know, even though we often might like to think that we're good at multitasking, we're not. And really, you know, we can't listen to you and listen to a different conversation at the same time, or read our phone or read our email and be there and be engaged and be present for you. Distracted listening can also be just about maybe, you know, focusing more on the person's features or the story that you want to give to them when they're talking, rather than the content of what they're actually speaking about. We can be distracted when we're unwell, when we're tired, when we're feeling tired, when we're just not focusing too well on a particular day, or just even being too much in our own minds when somebody is speaking. So rather than connecting in with them, empathizing with them, placing our own narrative really on top of the narrative that they're giving us. We talked a bit about evaluative listening as well. So the type of listening that comes with judgment, that comes with appraisal, totally appropriate in certain contexts, let's say in a negotiation type of situation, in an interview, perhaps even when you really do need to understand the message behind the message. But so much of the time, unless we bring our consciousness back to the type of listening we're engaged in, it's completely inappropriate that we might be doing that. So rather than, again, connecting in and really trying to be with the speaker, we're instead adopting some kind of a judgment, be it good or bad. It's still a judgment in terms of the context of what's being spoken about. A step up from that then is paying attention. So when we're actually making that conscious effort to concentrate and to at least understand the information that we're getting, if perhaps missing the wider picture. But I think the interesting thing about this one for me was that even though we might be there and concentrating, we're not yet in flow. So Tanya was talking about this idea of flow earlier, and we want to ideally get to a stage where it's high impact and low effort. So we're in the zone. So we're not really having to try. And what that actually requires for us to get there, because it requires us stepping outside of our own minds and trying to just be present with the listener, which is a very, I don't know if it's a difficult thing to do, but I think it's a rare thing to do. And it certainly requires, it's a skill that we need to develop and we need to learn. So what was so interesting for me about this session was when we put that into practice. So we were put in pairs and given the opportunity to just speak about something for, I think it was 3 or 4 minutes. And what really struck me about that was how odd it felt when somebody was really listening to you, and how uncomfortable it felt, because I was so unused to that actually happening. I really didn't like it, and suddenly become very aware of what you're saying. And I think maybe it's because in life we're so rarely granted that opportunity that, you know, we almost rely on the fact that somebody's not completely listening to us properly. So being able to, it's a real gift that you're given from somebody else to kind of assure you that you're not boring them, just even with their facial expressions, with their openness, and that they really are present with you. And when you can get to that point, how amazing that actually feels. That was my major takeaway from this, was just having the experience of that and realizing that then for us as coaches, even though we already know it, the importance of not interjecting and really, you know, trying to understand that giving people this space doesn't have to be awkward. It doesn't have to be difficult. And once coaches understand that we're genuine and we're authentic about wanting to be present with them, wanting to empathize, just a reminder, I suppose, of what a great thing that is to do for somebody. So that were my takeaways. And then the quote was, one of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another person has to say. So that's me.
Thanks a million, Susan. It's always super to be reminded of that. Really, really interesting and honest about the, you know, feeling uncomfortable with the deep listening. It's so true when it happens. And as coaches and that, we're often not on the receiving end of it. And that can be unusual as well for us to be on that side of things. Yeah. So just as we start to finish up, folks, look, we'd love to hear a little bit from you. What have all of you enjoyed about Dirty Salad Club in 2021? What's been helpful? What have you put into practice? What might you like to see in 2022? Anything at all you'd like to share?
A lot of good coaching questions there, Tanya.
I don't mind sharing something, but it came from the Dirty Salad Club actually kind of further back than 21, kind of actually when we started it. And just, I suppose, hello everyone, for anyone who doesn't know, I used to work with Finch Lions, so I was involved in organising the Dirty Salad Club sessions. And when we ran the first session, it was late March 2020. Very unprecedented times, and you know, we didn't really know what we were doing. I didn't really have, like, say, a crystal clear picture of what this is going to be, you know, how it's going to be done. I think my natural preference is to kind of, you know, have that plan in place, have a picture of it and be organized. But I think one of the biggest learnings for me from this group was start before you're ready. And just that kind of desire for things being perfect, or, you know, to plan everything can kind of paralyze you. So I think it was great to, you know, and it might be something that I was kind of aware of, is that it's fine to, you know, try and fail and then do it again. But this was the kind of practical learning of, okay, just do it, and then you have something to learn from. So I think that's kind of the beauty of this group, is like the dirty element of the Dirty Salad Club. You know, you can try and fail and then learn from it. So that's something that I've kind of taken, is that just start before you're ready.
Love it. And it's kind of echoing Carol Dweck, who talks about, you know, not just going home saying who had a great day today, but who gave something a go and it didn't work out for you.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, learning that to kids. And that's what Dirty Salad Club, I know we've given insights into really good speakers there, but it's also about anybody wanting to host something on something that didn't work, or a blooper, the biggest bloopers of the year, which is more interesting. And we hope to do one in person actually next year as well. So there's loads of iterations we'll do. That's great.
Anything, I'm conscious of time, and if anybody needs to jump off the call, please feel free to go. But is there anything coming up for anyone that they're seeing a lot in their work that they're really interested in, that they might like us, they might like to look at, to host yourselves, or for somebody else to look at as we come into next year?
Just looking at one in the chat there from Finton. Finton, you want to talk to that one?
Just on the virtual, no, just it's what Susan said, and it's parts of the Dirty Salad Club that I really enjoyed was the experiential learning part of it, of going into the breakout rooms, failure, and you know, failure is a comma, not a full stop, and it leading to creativity, because if it didn't work, have a go. And but just putting some of the things like Julie's piece, had what she had said there as well, of, you know, start somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, it's the typical Irish thing of, well, if I was going there, I wouldn't start from here. But just start. And just the thing on time, you know, that you negotiate the non-negotiables for our environment and what's the norms for us, because environment impacts, you know, I'll roar and shout at a football game, I won't do it on the street.
Yeah, that's what Billy was talking about as well. And even if you think of when we began, most people hadn't been in breakout rooms. It's gas now there's the norm. We expect them. And you also notice what's really interesting, the minute you say breakout group on a Dirty Salad Club at the beginning, you'd lose a load of people. You know, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think that's, most people find that in training, you know.
Could I just to your point, Tanya, and just to start by saying as well, yeah, I remember so well in the pandemic when the first few times I came on the Dirty Salad Club, and it was just a complete lifeline. It was like, oh my goodness, this is fantastic, just to have this community and to be learning as we go. And I remember one of Billy's sessions, I borrowed something from him that he used, which I just thought was so clever, about just asking people at the very beginning of when you're coaching or doing a meeting or whatever, how are you? You know, just actually genuinely checking in with them, because everybody was in such a funny space at the time. And that actually was incredibly powerful. I started to do that. And it was just, people were kind of surprised at the beginning. I was like, what? But I was like, well, how are you today? How are you all doing? And it really was very, very effective. So thank you, Billy, for that one. I pinched that one from you. But just in terms of your questions, Tanya, about future things, I've been getting asked a lot by my clients about, now I know everybody's sick to death of this subject, but the whole hybrid work thing, not even so much around that, but even maybe you could tie it in with something to do with change. I think change is something that people, you know, we've been through. It seems to me just like we're going, like everybody was getting used to go back to the workplace. And then it was suddenly like, oh no, now we're not going back to the workplace. Now we're back at home again. And people just didn't know. I've spoken to so many clients and they're like, I don't know which end of me is up, quite frankly. One minute I'm going back to work and the next minute I'm not. And I just don't know. They're finding it hard. So I think something around change management, or, you know, just dealing with that. I mean, a lot of people are talking to me about, I was talking to lots of clients about adapting to a hybrid work model and how was that all going to work. But again, that seems to be shifting sands. So that would be my 10 cents.
Lovely. Justine, when are you going to do this one? I'm looking forward to it.
And that's not my specialist area. I'm sure there's somebody
I was also thinking when you said, Billy said, how are you? Which sounds so simple. We also had, remember Pedro and Gulo did a great one during the year, but Pedro has a great one. He was the OD head in AIB, now in Brian Thomas Arnott's. But he goes, how's your energy? You know, and it always throws people to go, how's me what? But it's a great conversation to start with. How's your energy? Yeah.
I love his energy, it's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Justine, I think we'll definitely be looking at that on into next year. There were 2 sessions this year that you might, if you missed them at the time, there was Louisa Bullow's session on keeping change people-centric and Becca Brighty's session on the neuropsychology of change.
Oh,
you might like in the meantime.
Sorry, could you say those 2 names for me again, Tanya? Till I just jot that down.
Yeah, it was Louisa Bullow, B-U-L-O-W, and Becca Brighty.
Brilliant. I'll look those up. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Folks, I'm conscious of time and people might have other commitments on the hour at 12 o'clock. Anything else anyone would like to share, suggest?
Hi, Tanya. Maybe in the same vein as Justine was saying, maybe that was done before, but I was thinking about resilience because, you know, the pandemic, you know, we were waiting for the vaccine, and then the vaccine was here, and we were all looking forward to this and to the end of 2021, and now we're again back to square one, you know, back to working at home, and we're now looking at the booster, and so many people, not even clients, but even from my immediate circle of friends and family, are like, we were hoping, we had so much hope. And I think it's a big one at the moment. Even personally, you know, you start finding that more and more people have COVID, and, you know, it used to be, you know, far, and then suddenly it's getting, I feel, you know, it's like closing in on us. So I think resilience hasn't been done recently. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Farzana. We've done a little bit, but I think again with the change, there's always another angle. There'll always be a different way of looking at it. So absolutely, yeah.
But and Farzana as well, because I know you're a psychologist as well.
Yes, I am.
So if you'd love, it would be great if you explored resilience with us. If you're up for it, it'd be great to have you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, Alan. I'll think about it. Yeah, maybe not.
Or something.
Maybe not for January.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as we're saying to all of you, and as we talk about hosting and presenting, you know, back to Julie's point about it's about giving it a go. It's called the Dirty Salad Club for a reason, you know, and it's not even about any of us being the absolute expert in the topic, but it's opening the floor, creating the space.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, but for example, you could actually turn up to want to talk about resilience, but get everybody else to share their ideas on it.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll take up the challenge. Maybe February then.
Brilliant.
Super. Catherine, thanks for your input there. I see leadership for equity. Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, I turned my camera on. It's 6 o'clock in the morning here. Oh, actually, it's 10 to 7 in Canada. So it was a little early for me to turn my camera on. Yeah, no. And Alan, hello. We took our certification way back in Canada together.
Brilliant, Captain. I thought the name was familiar. Well done. What's the weather like this morning?
Well, about 2 feet of snow.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
So you'd be surprised if we get half an inch, we shut down the country.
No, we've got quite a bit of snow, but it's supposed to change. So yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So no, I just I put in the chat because actually I follow Alan on LinkedIn, and I saw this and I thought, oh my gosh, I want to hear what's going on, you know, with you in your side of the world. And for a future date, I'm really happy to share, you know, some of the work I've been doing around leadership for equity, which is a really significant topic. And so, yeah, add me to the list if people would like to hear a little bit more about what we're doing in Canada and the US on that topic.
Absolutely, Catherine. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Hey, folks, I think that's a wrap for today. So thanks everybody for being here, and a very, very Merry Christmas to everybody. Let's hope we get to enjoy it. And we'll see you all for more fun, excitement, learning, getting together in 2022. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks a
Bye-bye.
million. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.